Two brothers made a promise as children, but years later, life would test whether that promise still meant anything. They promised to return home together one day, never knowing how far life would pull them apart. Then one brother disappeared into a life of ambition, while the other stayed behind, waiting for a promise that seemed forgotten. Years passed without a call, without a visit, until one unexpected message changed everything. It said only this: "I think it's time we finish what we started." Their story began many years earlier, beneath an old oak tree where two young brothers dreamed about the future. They were different in almost every way, but nothing could separate them when they were together. Every afternoon, they explored the fields surrounding their small village, imagining adventures beyond the distant mountains. One summer day, they discovered an old map hidden inside a wooden box in their childhood home. The map showed a mysterious mountain lake far beyond the village, and suddenly, they had a dream. They decided that one day, they would follow that map and stand together beside that lake. Beneath the old oak tree, the brothers made a promise they believed would last forever. They promised that no matter where life took them, they would return and complete the journey together. They shook hands, laughed, and believed that nothing in the world could ever change their plans. But childhood promises are easy to make when the future still feels like an endless road. As the years passed, the brothers grew older, and their dreams slowly began to change. The older brother wanted to leave the village and build a life somewhere far away. The younger brother wanted to stay close to home and protect the family they had always known. At first, their differences seemed harmless, because they still believed they had plenty of time. But sometimes, time quietly creates distance before anyone realizes they are already far apart. One morning, the older brother packed his belongings and prepared to leave the village. His brother stood beside him, trying to hide the sadness behind a brave smile. Before leaving, the older brother promised they would return to the old oak tree someday. He reminded his brother about the map and the journey they had promised to finish. The younger brother believed him, because brothers are supposed to believe each other. Then the older brother walked away, carrying his dreams toward a world neither of them truly understood. At first, they stayed connected through letters and occasional calls filled with stories about their new lives. The older brother found work in a distant city where everything moved faster than he had imagined. The younger brother remained in the village, watching the seasons change around the old family home. Every night, the younger brother looked toward the road and wondered when his brother would finally return. Months became years, and the calls between them slowly became less frequent. The older brother became busy chasing success, opportunities, and a future he thought he needed. Meanwhile, the younger brother began to feel that the promise from childhood was being forgotten. He kept the old map safely hidden, hoping that someday it would bring his brother home. But every year that passed made the promise feel more like a memory than a future. Then one winter, their father became seriously ill, and everything suddenly changed. The younger brother called immediately, asking his brother to come home. The older brother promised he would return as soon as he could leave his responsibilities behind. But days passed, and his brother never arrived. By the time he finally returned, the funeral was already over, and the house felt painfully empty. The brothers stood together again, but years of silence stood between them. Neither brother knew what to say, because grief had turned every word into something difficult. The younger brother wanted to blame him, but anger could not bring their father back. The older brother wanted forgiveness, but he knew he had no right to demand it. So they stood in silence, two brothers who had once promised never to be apart. That night, the older brother found the old wooden box hidden beneath his childhood bed. Inside was the faded map they had discovered together so many years ago. He unfolded it slowly and remembered the promise they had made beneath the old oak tree. For the first time in years, he realized how much of his brother he had lost. The next morning, he placed the map on the kitchen table between them. His brother looked at the map, and suddenly, neither of them needed to explain what it meant. The journey they had promised to make was still waiting for them. But this time, the journey was about more than reaching a distant lake. It was about finding the brother they had both slowly lost along the way. The older brother asked a simple question: "Do you still want to go?" His brother stared at the map for a long moment before quietly saying yes. For the first time in years, they began preparing for something together. They packed only what they needed and left behind the lives that had kept them apart. Before leaving, they returned to the old oak tree where their childhood promise had begun. Standing beneath its branches, they remembered two children who once believed forever was guaranteed. The older brother admitted that he had spent years chasing a future while forgetting his past. His brother confessed that he had spent years waiting for someone who might never return. Neither brother was completely innocent, and neither brother was completely to blame. Life had simply pulled them in different directions, one small decision at a time. But now, they had one chance to choose a different direction together. They started walking before sunrise, leaving the village behind them. The road ahead was long, but for the first time, neither brother walked it alone. Along the way, they began talking about everything they had missed. They shared stories about failures, dreams, regrets, and the lives they had built apart. Slowly, the silence between them began disappearing. They crossed the first mountain pass as the sun climbed above the horizon. The older brother realized that his brother remembered every detail of their childhood. Even the smallest memories he had forgotten were still alive in his brother's heart. They stopped beside a river where they once used to play as children. The river looked different now, but the memories suddenly felt exactly the same. They sat beside the water and remembered the day they first found their mysterious map. For a moment, they were children again, dreaming about a world waiting beyond the mountains. Then the older brother noticed something written on the back of the old map. It was a small message they had written together as children, promising to return. The message was faded, but the promise was still clear. They continued their journey with renewed determination. The road became steeper, the weather colder, and the mountains seemed farther than ever. One afternoon, exhaustion finally forced them to stop and rest. The younger brother admitted that he was afraid they might never reach the lake. The older brother smiled and reminded him that the journey was already changing everything. They had started walking toward a destination, but they were slowly finding their way back to each other. The next morning, they climbed higher into the mountains. The path became narrow, forcing them to walk carefully side by side. When one brother struggled, the other reached out without hesitation. For the first time in years, they were once again protecting each other. They crossed a dangerous bridge suspended above a deep valley. Halfway across, the younger brother froze, afraid to take another step. His brother turned back and waited, just as he had waited for him as a child. He did not rush him or leave him behind. He simply stayed. Slowly, the younger brother found the courage to continue. Together, they reached the other side of the bridge. Neither brother said anything, but both understood what had just happened. The promise they made as children was becoming real in a way neither had expected. They were learning that keeping a promise sometimes meant simply refusing to leave someone behind. Days later, they finally saw the mountain lake from the distant ridge. The younger brother stopped in disbelief, because the place looked exactly like the picture from their childhood dreams. The older brother stood beside him, realizing that the dream had survived all those years. They descended toward the lake together, carrying every memory that had brought them there. When they finally reached the shore, neither brother celebrated immediately. Instead, they stood quietly, listening to the water and remembering everything they had lost. The journey had taken them farther than either brother expected, but the greatest distance they had traveled was the distance between their hearts. The older brother apologized for choosing success over the people who loved him. The younger brother apologized for allowing resentment to replace communication. For the first time, they both accepted responsibility for the years they had lost. Then they sat beside the lake and watched the sun disappear behind the mountains. They realized that some promises are not fulfilled by reaching a destination. Some promises are fulfilled when people finally choose to return to each other. The next morning, they began the journey home. This time, the road felt different because neither brother was running away from anything. They walked slowly, taking time to appreciate every moment they had once taken for granted. Along the way, they stopped at places that reminded them of their childhood. Every memory became another piece of the story they were rebuilding together. The old map no longer felt like a guide to a distant destination. It had become a reminder of the promise that brought them back to one another. As they approached their village, familiar lights began appearing in the distance. The brothers walked quietly, both realizing that they were finally going home. When the village appeared before them, the younger brother smiled for the first time in a long while. The older brother looked at his childhood home and wondered why he had stayed away so long. They reached the old family house just as evening settled over the village. Standing at the door, they remembered the two children who had once dreamed inside those walls. The older brother opened the door, and warm light welcomed them back inside. Their childhood room looked smaller than they remembered, but the memories were still enormous. They placed the old map, photograph, and childhood treasures inside their memory box. For the first time, they were not preserving memories of the past. They were creating new ones. The brothers decided to take one final photograph together in the room where their story began. They stood side by side, smiling at the camera like the children they once were. The new photograph was placed beside an old childhood picture on the wall. Two moments separated by years now stood together in the same frame. The brothers looked at the photographs and realized how much life had changed them. But despite everything, the bond between them had never completely disappeared. That night, they sat together beneath the photographs and talked until the room became quiet. They spoke about the future, this time making no promises they could not keep. Instead, they promised something simpler. They would never let silence separate them again. The next morning, sunlight entered the room, marking the beginning of a new chapter. They shared breakfast together, enjoying the ordinary moments they once believed would always be there. The older brother asked what they should do next. The younger brother smiled and suggested they plan another journey. This time, the journey would not be something they waited decades to begin. They spread a blank sheet of paper across the table and started dreaming again. Beside the blank paper, they placed the old map that had changed their lives. The old map represented the promise they had finally fulfilled. The blank paper represented every new memory still waiting to be created. The brothers realized that the best part of their story was not behind them. For the first time, they were looking forward to the future together. That evening, the brothers returned to the old oak tree one more time. They stood beneath the branches where two children had once made an impossible promise. The village lights glowed behind them as they prepared to leave again. But this time, neither brother was leaving the other behind. They walked toward the road carrying the same old map and a completely different understanding of life. The map had once represented a destination, but now it represented everything they had survived together. They stopped when the wind suddenly lifted the map from their hands. Both brothers laughed as they chased it across the road, just like children again. In that simple moment, they realized how many years they had wasted being apart. And they silently promised themselves they would never waste another moment that way. The next morning, they woke up ready to continue their journey together. They shared one final breakfast at the old family table. They talked about tomorrow, no longer afraid that tomorrow would separate them. Together, they began planning a new adventure, one that belonged entirely to the future. The old map rested beside the new plan, connecting their childhood dreams to everything ahead. They understood that the promise had changed, but its meaning had become even stronger. They walked down the same childhood path that once led them away from each other. At the edge of the village, they stopped and looked back one final time. Behind them was the past. Ahead was an unknown road they would face together. And for the first time, neither brother was afraid of what came next. They continued walking, side by side, with no destination more important than being together. A sudden gust of wind nearly carried their old map away. They laughed together, discovering that the joy they once shared as children was still alive. They stopped on a grassy hill and watched the world stretch endlessly before them. Without saying a word, they looked at each other and understood the promise they now carried. As the sun began to set, the brothers continued walking toward the glowing horizon. Night slowly covered the road, but this time, neither brother had to walk through darkness alone. Beneath the stars, they finally understood that some journeys are worth taking simply because of who walks beside you. At sunrise, they stood together before a new horizon, knowing their childhood promise had finally been fulfilled. Because in the end, the greatest promise was never about reaching a place. It was about never losing each other again.